So the next theme of biology to discuss today is this idea of energy. And probably more than any of the other themes that we talk about, this one at its base really is critical in ensuring that life exists and life continues. So we can look at the idea of energy at a couple of different levels. One, let's kind of start with something hopefully you're already familiar with, and that's the idea that energy has to flow through an ecosystem. Food webs, food pyramids. So at each level of a food pyramid, right, only 10% of that energy gets to pass from one trophic level to the next. Ultimately, everything starts with those producers, or those autotrophs at the bottom of the food chain. These are the ones who take in that energy from the sun if they're photosynthetic, and then they produce enough energy to travel up the food chain from there, or maybe they're chemosynthetic, and so they do chemosynthesis. But either way, those producers are the basis for all the energy that gets brought in and created in that ecosystem. From there, it's the consumers who then are working up those additional trophic levels, or heterotrophs, right? They need to consume food in order to utilize the energy that they're getting from what they're eating, and that energy then gets passed on from there. But we can also talk about how those organisms utilize that energy then in their own body. So what we're talking about here is metabolism. And when we talk about an organism's metabolism, we're talking about the total combination of all the chemical reactions that occur in that organism, from taking in that energy from somewhere and converting it into something they can actually use. So your producers, right, your plants, chemosynthetic bacteria, these guys are your autotrophs. So they've got one of two options. Either they're chemosynthetic, right, so they produce organic molecules from some inorganic source. So their energy source isn't the sun, but rather chemicals maybe coming from these deep ocean hydrothermal vents, for example. But they're the bottom of the food chain. They're the biggest in terms of the biomass that makes up that ecosystem. Or they're photosynthetic, which is what most kids think about when we talk about autotrophs, your typical plants, algae, that kind of stuff. And they're using the energy from the sun and converting it into organic molecules, aka glucose or sugars, that then those primary producers eat, store in their body. Secondary consumers then eat them, so on and so forth. So those consumers are your heterotrophs. These are the guys that their metabolic processes are really strictly limited to cellular respiration. They need to take in organic molecules in order to produce then energy that they need. That being said, and here's a really good side note for yourself, cellular respiration isn't just heterotrophs. Your autotrophs, their only option is chemosynthesis or photosynthesis in order to make those actual organic molecules, but your autotrophs will also then do cellular respiration from the molecules that they create to make energy for themselves. So autotrophs are going to do either chemosynthesis or photosynthesis, and they'll also do cellular respiration. For heterotrophs, on the other hand, cellular respiration is all that they can do, and we'll talk more about this as the year progresses. So what's the connection here? Well, all of your metabolism is driving the energy needs that you have, but then we've also got to regulate your body and make sure that your body is functioning the way it's supposed to, aka I want to keep it at homeostasis. So you've got all of these mechanisms that are often tied to those metabolic processes to keep your body at a steady state. So the same temperature, the same pH, the same water content. And any time that your body is out of homeostasis, we start talking about how systems don't work as efficiently. We may talk about disease processes, things like that. So in order for your body as a multicellular organism to maintain homeostasis, your cells have to be able to communicate with each other, not only within the same system, but between systems. So you've got two particular communication systems that really work together to ensure that everything in your body maintains that homeostasis. And that's your endocrine system, so things like your hormones, insulin, estrogen, testosterone, as well as your nervous system, so your brain and your neurons. They work together to communicate with each other to ensure that that regulation, that homeostasis, stays in place. So if we look at it as kind of a seesaw and you're out of balance, let's use your body temperature, for example. So your body is recognizing, because you're in gym class and you just ran that mile, that you're now getting really hot, right? And so that variable, that body temperature, is now out of balance. All right, so you've got cells in your body whose job it is to have those receptors and recognize the change in body temperature. So we're going to sense that change. We're going to tell your brain, hey, guess what? Our body's warming up, and we're getting away from that sort of set point we talk about it as being normal, natural body temperature. So your body says, okay, your brain recognizes that systemically overall your body temperature is going up. So what's it going to do? It's going to send out information to your sweat glands, and we're going to cause you to sweat. Right? So that's where we are here. That sweating process, as well as letting your blood vessels dilate and get closer to the surface of your skin, it's all there to dissipate heat, to get the heat out of your body, and hopefully get you back to that 98.6 or whatever is normal body temperature for you. So to balance out the seesaw again. Alright, ladies and gents, we got just a couple more themes of biology to talk about that kind of wrap up this particular section. And so the next one on our list is this idea of adaptation and evolution. And this is going to be a big topic, a big unit that we talk about coming up in the not-so-distant future, because really all of biology at the end of the day has this idea of evolution and adaptation sort of living and working through all the other topics that we talk about. So just to kind of give you a brief overview for now, when we're talking about evolution, we're talking about this process that happens via natural selection in species over long periods of time. So it's these changes that are happening in these species as they adapt or inherit certain traits that increase their ability to survive in the current set parameters that their environment is dictating to them. And evolution happens by natural selection, where nature, based on the survival of certain individuals, selects for traits that are most advantageous to the survival of those organisms. So evolution is sort of this big overarching process. Natural selection's happening within that, and natural selection is selecting for these inherited traits. So there's a couple of big pieces that I'm really going to kind of focus on here, because they're going to be really important for you to understand once we get to evolution later this year. And that's the idea that A, those adaptations have to be inherited traits, meaning that they have to be characteristics that are actually coded for in the organism's genetic information. They have to be able to pass it on to their offspring. And that those adaptations also have to be able to allow them to survive and to reproduce better than another individual within their population. So when we look at a particular characteristic, there's going to be a range in terms of how that characteristic exists. So there's variation within the population of that species for that particular trait. So something as simple as just talking about an animal's fur color, for example. Some are going to be lighter, some are going to be darker, some are going to be somewhere in the middle, and a particular range within that fur color might be more advantageous to its survival because maybe it helps it blend in better, right? So that's an adaptation that is coded for in their DNA, and as a result helps them survive better, which means they produce more offspring based on the color of their fur. And so as the population evolves over long periods of time, many generations, we'll see a shift in that fur color to the color that happens to be more beneficial to that set of parameters in the environment. Should the environment shift, well, now that variation may change and evolution may happen again. The other piece I want to point out for now is that individuals are not the ones who are evolving. We use that evolution term a lot when we're talking about you evolving as a person, right? Changing based on life experiences. But here we're talking about biological evolution. And so an individual can't change the set of traits that they are born with. They're inherited. It's based on their DNA, their genetic code. But what we can see is that the frequency at which a particular gene increases or decreases can change in the population over time, because there are certain individuals with darker fur who are surviving and reproducing more often. They're producing more dark-furred offspring, and so that becomes the change that we see in the population over time. So it's not an individual who changes their characteristics and evolves in their lifetime. It's the population that sees a shift in how common a particular trait is, because that particular trait is more beneficial to the survival and the reproduction of its species. So hopefully that makes sense.